My mother-in-law changed the locks on my own house. While I was at the hospital, giving birth, she had a key made, without telling anyone. She moved my furniture. She was waiting in what she called the nursery when I came home with my newborn. Tonight, every single story is about a mother-in-law who overstepped in a way that could not be ignored, and 5 daughters-in-law who responded in ways that permanently changed the family dynamic. 5 confrontations, 5 satisfying resolutions. This is the part that gets me every time. Let me take you back to where each of these stories started. My name is Danielle. I am 31 years old. I live in Tampa, Florida, and 11 months ago I came home from a 3-day hospital stay following the birth of my first child to discover that my mother-in-law had, during my absence, had a locksmith change the locks on my house, moved several pieces of furniture from what I had set up as the nursery into a different room to accommodate her own preferences for the space, and was present in my house when my husband and I arrived home with our newborn, having let herself in with the new key she had ensured only she and my husband's father possessed. My mother-in-law's name is Carol. She is 63 years old and had, throughout my pregnancy, expressed strong and repeated opinions about nursery arrangements, feeding choices, and general household preparation for the baby that I had, for 9 months, managed with what I now recognize as more patience than the situation deserved. Carol's justification, when I asked her directly why she had changed the locks on a house that was not hers, was that she had wanted to surprise us with a properly organized nursery as a gift, and that changing the locks had been necessary because my husband, Kevin, had given her a spare key years earlier for emergency purposes, but that key had apparently stopped working at some point, prompting her, in her account, to simply have new keys made for the existing lock rather than attempting to fix the old key. An explanation that did not account for why the locks themselves had been entirely replaced rather than simply having additional keys cut. I want to describe what it was like to walk into my own home, 3 days postpartum, exhausted, and find my mother-in-law standing in a nursery she had rearranged according to her own taste, holding my newborn son, having let herself in with a key I had not given her, and had no knowledge of. Kevin was as surprised as I was. He confirmed immediately that he had not given his mother a new key or asked her to do anything to the nursery, and that whatever spare key arrangement Carol was referencing from years earlier had never included changing our locks. I did not confront Carol extensively in that moment, being 3 days postpartum and holding my newborn, but I told her clearly that I needed her to leave, and that Kevin and I would be discussing what had happened. She left, visibly hurt by what she characterized as an ungrateful response to a loving gesture. I want to describe what I did over the following week, because I think the response matters as much as the initial incident. I called a locksmith the following day and had every lock on the house changed again, this time ensuring that only Kevin and I possessed keys, with no spare keys given to any family member on either side going forward. I also consulted briefly with an attorney friend about whether Carol's actions constituted anything legally actionable, learning that while the specific circumstances made criminal trespass difficult to pursue given Kevin's family relationship and the ambiguous history of the original spare key, I had every right to secure my home going forward and to establish clear boundaries about access. I told Kevin clearly that his mother having any independent access to our home, now or in the future, was not something I was willing to accept, and that I needed him to communicate this boundary to her directly and firmly, rather than leaving me to manage the aftermath of a situation his own family member had created. Kevin, to his credit, had a serious conversation with Carol in which he told her that changing our locks without permission had been a significant violation regardless of her intentions, and that she would not be given keys to our home going forward under any circumstances. Update: 4 months later. Carol has not been given keys to our home since, and has, to her credit, not attempted to obtain them through any other means that I am aware of. Our relationship remains distant but functional. She visits when invited, calls ahead, and has not repeated any version of the boundary crossing that characterized the locks incident. Kevin told me last month that his mother had mentioned, in a conversation he had with her alone, that she still did not fully understand why changing the locks had been such a significant violation, framing her intentions as purely loving and my reaction as disproportionate, which tells me that while the specific behavior has stopped, the underlying belief that drove it, that her access to our life and our child superseded our own authority over our home, has not fully resolved on her end. I have decided that the behavior stopping is sufficient for now, even without full acknowledgement of why it was wrong, and I continue to maintain the boundary of no independent access to our home regardless of the reasoning behind it. Carol let herself in with a key she was never given, and just like Danielle, secured her home. After the violation, the woman in story 2 had to secure something even more personal, her own name, because her mother-in-law had been using it legally for something Danielle's daughter-in-law never would have consented to. Wait, this is the part that gets me most. Here is what she found. My name is Melissa. I am 37 years old. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and 14 months ago I discovered that my mother-in-law had, over the preceding 2 years, opened 3 separate credit accounts using my name, my social security number, and personal information she had obtained through access to documents I had left at my in-laws' house during a period when my husband and I had stored some belongings there during a move. My mother-in-law's name is Susan. She is 59 years old and had, I later learned through the investigation that followed, been experiencing significant financial difficulty that she had not disclosed to any family member, including my husband, her own son. I discovered the fraudulent accounts when I applied for a mortgage refinance, and the lender's credit check revealed 3 accounts I had never opened, with a combined balance of approximately $14,000, all significantly delinquent, which had damaged my credit score substantially without my knowledge. I want to describe the process of discovering the source of this fraud, because it took several weeks of investigation before Susan's involvement became clear. That I initially assumed identity theft by an unknown party, filed the standard reports with credit bureaus and the Federal Trade Commission, and began the process of disputing the fraudulent accounts. During this process, one of the credit card companies, investigating my fraud claim, provided documentation showing the address the fraudulent cards had been mailed to for a period before being redirected, an address that was not mine, and that I did not initially recognize, but that my husband identified immediately as his parents' address from several years earlier, before they had moved to their current home. This detail narrowed the investigation considerably. I want to describe the conversation with my husband, David, once we understood what the evidence suggested. He was understandably deeply reluctant to believe his own mother capable of this, and initially suggested alternative explanations. Perhaps someone else had used that old address, perhaps there was a clerical error. I told him I understood his reluctance, but that we needed to pursue the investigation regardless of where it led, both to clear my credit and to understand who had done this. We hired an attorney who specializes in identity theft cases, who helped us formally request additional documentation from the credit card companies, including the specific personal information that had been used to open the accounts. This documentation included answers to security questions that only someone with access to detailed personal history about me would have known. Information that pointed specifically toward someone within the family, rather than a random identity thief, since the accounts had used accurate information about my mother's maiden name and my childhood address, details Susan would have had access to through years of family gatherings and conversations, but that would not typically be available to an external fraudster. When confronted with this evidence, David spoke to his mother directly, initially hoping for an innocent explanation. Susan, after significant pressure and confrontation with the specific documentation, eventually admitted to opening the account, explaining that she had been in serious financial difficulty following some poor investment decisions and had felt she had no other option, believing in her explanation that she would be able to pay off the balances before I ever discovered the accounts existed, and that no real harm would come from what she characterized as a temporary and desperate measure. Update: 4 months later, I reported Susan's actions to law enforcement, resulting in federal charges given that the fraud involved multiple financial institutions and interstate credit reporting systems. This decision caused significant strain within my marriage and my husband's relationship with his mother, though David ultimately supported my decision to report the crime, telling me that regardless of his mother's financial desperation, what she had done to me was a serious violation that could not simply be absorbed as a family matter to be quietly resolved. Susan's case is currently proceeding through the federal court system, and she faces potential restitution obligations and, depending on the outcome, possible incarceration given the scope of the fraud. My credit has been substantially repaired through the dispute process, though rebuilding my credit score to its previous level has taken considerable time and effort. My relationship with Susan is completely severed. I have had no direct contact with her since the confrontation, and David has significantly limited his own contact as he processes what his mother did and what accountability should look like given their relationship. This has been, without question, one of the most difficult experiences of my adult life, made more complicated by the fact that the person who committed this fraud against me is someone I had trusted enough to have in my home, around my personal documents, for years before this occurred. Susan used Melissa's identity to open accounts she could not pay, and just like Melissa, discovered the fraud through a routine credit check. The woman in Story 3 discovered her mother-in-law's violation through something far more personal, her own body, because what her mother-in-law had been doing was not financial, it was medical, and it had been happening for months, without her knowledge. This is the part that stays with me. Here is what happened. My name is Jennifer. I am 34 years old. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and 10 months ago I discovered that my mother-in-law had, during her regular babysitting days with my 4-year-old daughter, been giving her a variety of herbal supplements and vitamins without my knowledge or consent, a practice that had been occurring for approximately 6 months before a routine pediatric blood test revealed unusual levels of certain nutrients that prompted my daughter's doctor to ask detailed questions about her diet and any supplements she might be receiving. My mother-in-law's name is Patricia. She watches my daughter, Emma, 2 days a week while I work, an arrangement that had been in place for over a year and that I had, until this discovery, considered a genuine blessing given the quality time it allowed Emma to spend with her grandmother. I want to describe the pediatrician appointment that revealed this because it was initially quite frightening before we understood what was actually happening. Emma's blood work showed elevated levels of several vitamins and minerals well beyond what her diet alone would explain, prompting her pediatrician to ask me directly whether Emma was receiving any supplements I had not disclosed. I told the doctor honestly that Emma was not on any supplements as far as I knew, which led to a more detailed conversation about who else cared for Emma and whether there was any possibility of unauthorized substances being given to her without my knowledge. This conversation made me realize I needed to ask Patricia directly, and specifically, about what Emma consumed during the days she spent at her grandmother's house. Patricia, when I asked her directly, acknowledged immediately and without significant defensiveness that she had been giving Emma a daily regimen of what she described as natural health supplements, several vitamins in doses exceeding standard pediatric recommendations, along with an herbal preparation she had purchased based on advice from an online wellness community she participated in. believing these substances would boost Emma's immune system and overall health. I want to describe what it felt like to learn that my daughter had been receiving unauthorized substances in doses that a medical professional considered concerning enough to investigate for 6 months without my knowledge, from someone I trusted with her care. Patricia's explanation, that she believed she was helping and had not thought to mention it because she considered vitamins and natural supplements harmless, did not adequately address the fundamental violation of giving my child substances without my knowledge or consent, particularly substances in doses her own doctor found concerning enough to flag during a routine checkup. I immediately discontinued Emma's time with Patricia unsupervised, informing her that any future time with Emma would need to occur either in my presence or under conditions where I had complete confidence that no unauthorized substances, foods, or activities would occur without my explicit knowledge and consent. I also consulted with Emma's pediatrician about whether any lasting effects needed to be monitored, and was relieved to learn that while the elevated levels were concerning enough to warrant investigation, they were not at a level expected to cause lasting harm, though the doctor was clear that different or larger doses could have posed more significant risk. Update 4 months later. Patricia has not had unsupervised time with Emma since this discovery, an arrangement that has required significant restructuring of my childcare situation, and that has been a source of ongoing tension with my husband, who, while supporting the safety concern, has expressed sadness at the reduced relationship between his mother and daughter. Patricia has, in the months since, completed a basic child safety and nutrition course that I requested as a condition of any future consideration of resuming unsupervised care, a request she initially resisted as excessive but ultimately completed. I have not yet decided whether to resume unsupervised arrangements even with this additional step completed, as the fundamental breach of trust, giving my child unauthorized substances for 6 months without disclosure, continues to weigh heavily on my confidence in her judgment regarding Emma's care. My husband and I continue to work through disagreements about the appropriate long-term arrangement, though he has, to his credit, not pressured me to resume unsupervised care faster than I feel comfortable with, acknowledging that the final decision about Emma's safety and care needs to prioritize my confidence in the arrangement above his mother's feelings about the restriction. Patricia gave unauthorized supplements for 6 months, without disclosure. Our final story tonight, story 4, is about a mother-in-law who did something that could not be undone with a supervised visit or restored lock, because what she destroyed was not physical, it was a reputation built over an entire career. And what the daughter-in-law did in response took 8 months to complete, but when it was finished, it was complete. This is the part that gets me the most. In tonight's 5 stories, here is what happened. My name is Stephanie. I am 40 years old, I live in Columbus, Ohio, and 16 months ago I was passed over for a significant promotion I had been the leading internal candidate for, following what my supervisor later described, once I pressed for an explanation, as concerns that had been raised anonymously about my reliability and personal conduct, specifically an anonymous report suggesting I had a drinking problem that affected my work performance, an allegation that was completely false and that I eventually traced back to my own mother-in-law. My mother-in-law's name is Linda. She is 66 years old and had, for reasons rooted in a general disapproval of my career ambitions that she had never fully articulated but had expressed through years of comments suggesting I should prioritize family over professional advancement, apparently decided to sabotage a promotion opportunity she had learned about through a family dinner conversation where I had shared, with excitement, that I was being considered for the position. I want to describe how I traced this back to Linda, because the process requires significant persistence. My supervisor, when I asked directly about the anonymous concerns that had affected the promotion decision, was initially reluctant to share details, citing standard practices around anonymous reporting, but eventually confirmed, once I explained how deeply this had affected my career and how confident I was that the allegations were false, that the report had come through the company's anonymous ethics hotline, describing specific incidents of alleged intoxication at work events that, upon investigation, I was able to demonstrate had not occurred as described, including one supposed incident at a company function that records showed I had not even attended due to a scheduling conflict. This specific factual error, describing an incident at an event I could prove I had not attended, became the key to unraveling the entire fabrication, because it demonstrated the report had been based not on genuine observation but on assumption or fabrication by someone who knew my general schedule but not the specific details well enough to construct an accurate false narrative. I worked with HR to understand what other details the anonymous report contained, and several other elements pointed toward someone with detailed knowledge of my family life and schedule but limited actual workplace observation, details that fit Linda's knowledge of me far better than they fit any actual colleague. I confronted Linda directly, without initially revealing how much I already suspected, simply asking her if she knew anything about concerns being raised about me at work. Her reaction, becoming immediately flustered and defensive before I had even specified what kind of concerns I meant, told me most of what I needed to know before she said anything further. I want to describe the conversation that followed because Linda's eventual admission, after I pressed with specific details from the anonymous report that only someone with intimate family knowledge could have provided, was both a confession and a justification, in which she explained that she believed the promotion would take me away from my family responsibilities and that she had felt, in her words, that she needed to do something to protect her son's marriage and her grandchildren's well-being from what she saw as my excessive career focus. I obtained Linda's admission in a recorded conversation, with her knowledge that I was recording given Ohio's one-party consent laws, specifically because I anticipated needing documentation to clear my professional reputation. I provided this recording to my employer's HR department, along with a formal complaint requesting that the anonymous report be formally retracted and my personnel file corrected to remove any reference to the false allegations. The company conducted a full review and ultimately reopened the promotion consideration, though the original position had by then been filled by another candidate. I was instead offered a comparable position that opened shortly after, along with a formal apology from leadership for the impact the false report had had on my career trajectory. My relationship with Linda has been essentially severed since this confrontation. My husband, while initially struggling to accept what his mother had done, ultimately told her directly that sabotaging my career through workplace fraud was not something he could excuse regardless of her stated intentions, and our contact with her has been minimal and strictly limited to occasions involving our children, always with my husband present and Linda's behavior closely monitored. I received the comparable position I mentioned 4 months ago and have been performing well in the new role, though I continue to feel the impact of the 16 months during which a false allegation, created by my own mother-in-law, altered the trajectory of a career I had worked over a decade to build. Linda tried to destroy Stephanie's career to protect what she believed was her son's marriage. Our final story tonight, Story 5, is about a mother-in-law whose interference did not target a career or a credit score or a nursery, targeted something even more fundamental, the wedding itself, on the actual day, in front of everyone. And what the bride did in response is the story I have been saving for last tonight, as it might be the most satisfying thing you hear all night. Here is what happened. My name is Rachel. I am 29 years old, I live in Portland, Oregon, and 18 months ago my mother-in-law stood up during the traditional moment in our wedding ceremony when the officiant asks if anyone present has reason the marriage should not proceed, and delivered a lengthy statement to our 120 assembled guests explaining why she believed her son and I should not be marrying, an act I had, based on specific warning signs over the preceding 3 months, actually anticipated and prepared for in advance. My mother-in-law's name is Deborah. She is 61 years old and had, throughout our 18-month engagement, expressed escalating disapproval of our marriage, rooted primarily in her belief that I was not, in her words, sophisticated enough for her son, a software engineer she felt should have married someone with what she considered a more prestigious career than my work as an elementary school teacher. Approximately 3 months before the wedding, my now husband Michael overheard his mother on a phone call describing, to a friend, a specific intention to speak up during the ceremony if the wedding proceeded, a comment Michael relayed to me immediately, deeply embarrassed and apologetic on his mother's behalf. I want to describe what we did with this warning, because the preparation is the entire reason the actual incident, when it occurred, produced a completely different outcome than Deborah likely anticipated. Michael and I discussed the situation extensively, including with our officiant, a family friend who had known both of us for years, and made a specific decision about how to handle the moment if Deborah followed through on her stated intention. We decided against removing the traditional objection moment from the ceremony entirely, which would have been the simplest solution, because Michael felt strongly that avoiding the moment would feel like conceding power to his mother's threat, rather than confidently proceeding with our marriage regardless of her disapproval. Instead, we prepared a specific response coordinated with our officiant for exactly the scenario that ultimately occurred. When the officiant reached the traditional question and paused, Deborah stood, as she had told her friend she intended to, and began delivering a statement to the assembled guests about her concerns regarding the marriage, specifically raising doubts about my suitability as a partner for her son in terms that were clearly rehearsed and had, based on her opening words, been planned for some time. Our officiant, following the plan we had discussed, allowed her to speak for approximately 30 seconds before interjecting, calmly and clearly, to note that this portion of the ceremony existed to address legal impediments to marriage rather than personal preferences about a partner's suitability, and asked Deborah directly whether she was aware of any legal impediment to the marriage, a bigamous relationship, a close blood relationship between the parties, or similar legal barriers, as opposed to a personal objection to the match. Deborah, visibly caught off guard by this specific and pointed question, acknowledged she had no such legal objection, simply personal reservations about the marriage. Our officiant then stated, still calmly, that personal reservations, while understandable as an expression of parental concern, were not relevant to this portion of the ceremony, and asked Deborah to be seated so the ceremony could proceed, which she did, visibly flustered, after a brief hesitation. The ceremony continued without further interruption. That I want to describe what happened after the ceremony, because our preparation extended beyond the moment itself. Michael had decided, in the weeks leading up to the wedding, once we understood his mother's intentions, that if she did follow through on her plan, he wanted to address it directly with her rather than simply moving past it, feeling that allowing it to go unaddressed would set a precedent for future behavior throughout our marriage. Update: 4 months later. Michael spoke with Deborah directly the week after our wedding, once we had returned from our honeymoon, telling her clearly that her actions during the ceremony had been deeply hurtful and disrespectful, both to me and to him, and that any future attempts to publicly undermine our marriage or express disapproval in front of others would result in significantly reduced contact between her and our future family. Deborah's initial response was defensive, characterizing her actions as a mother's right to express concern, but Michael held firm, telling her that whatever her intentions, the venue and method she had chosen were designed to embarrass and undermine rather than genuinely communicate concern, which could have been expressed privately at any point during our 18-month engagement rather than during the ceremony itself in front of everyone we knew. Deborah has, in the months since, been notably more restrained in expressing her opinions about our marriage, though she has not offered what I would consider a genuine apology, instead treating the incident as something we have collectively agreed not to discuss further rather than something she has fully reckoned with. Michael and I have discussed extensively how we want to handle her ongoing presence in our lives, particularly as we consider having children eventually, and have agreed that any future incidents of public undermining or disrespect will result in immediate and significant consequences for her access to our family life going forward. I think often about the 3 months of preparation before our wedding, and I am deeply grateful that Michael's willingness to overhear that phone call and take his mother's stated intention seriously allowed us to face the moment with a plan rather than being caught completely off guard in front of everyone we love on what should have been one of the happiest days of our lives.